Sheriff in town. There's a new director of DMH, Dr. John Sharon, and he's really, in my opinion, taken on a very aggressive vision. And I have to tell you that I've been in government work before. I've been in the Department of Public Health in San Francisco prior experience. I was deputy of behavioral health in San Francisco, and I left public health because I became disillusioned with the services and the challenge of access for so many folks, and particularly I think for young men of color who disproportionately end up in jails and out on the streets. Because we don't know how to really address the issue in a sustainable and methodic manner. And so I didn't want to be a signature on a piece of paper that was contributing to that reality. And so I left public health service and afterwards went to work in Africa with boy soldiers. And so I went from San Francisco's Department of Public Health to Liberia. And while I was working with young boy soldiers, many of them 9 years old, 10 years old, who have seen such severe violence and have lost parents, have lost ancestors, have lost their connection to culture and spirituality and all the things that we know can help strengthen our resolve and can help us become stronger and be able to deal with our mental health challenges. What happens in a country, what happens in a culture where all of the underpinnings of support, all those things that could help you get anchored, create an identity, and have a sense of self, have a sense of your community, have a sense of what it means for you to be alive in this world and what your purpose is. What happens when all of that is taken out? And interestingly enough, I found that the similarities between the reality that I was living in Liberia was so very similar to the issues that I see out in the streets with our young men of color who have lost a lot of those attributes and a lot of those connections that really provide resiliency, that really provide a sense of rootedness and connection to culture, to identity, to family, to spirituality, to support. So this notion of changing business as usual for the Department of Public Health, the Department of Mental Health, is a serious business for me. And I'm back mindfully and purposely because I believe in Dr. Sharon's vision. And I want to be there to be a part of this experiment. I want to be there when we begin to unite with each other and demand greater care. Demand greater connection to our communities of color, greater connection to our cultures, greater connection to our sense of spirituality, greater connection to each other, greater connection to the help that we all need in order to see our family and loved ones become better. We're all part of the answer, and it cannot be done unless we're all demanding that this shift happen with us, for us, and as a central component of our own healing process. And so the idea, the reason why I chose this presentation, first of all, is I want you to recognize what we're doing in the Department of Public Health so that you can figure out where and how you plug in, because you gotta plug in. You have got to be the ones that hold us accountable for doing that which we say we want to do and doing that which we say we can do and should do, right? You have to hold us accountable. And so the idea of the Office of Discipline Chiefs, I think, we all agree that discipline has a negative connotation to it. We all think, kind of going to the principal's office and being disciplined. It's not that kind of a discipline that we're talking about. We're talking about the profession So the idea of having a chief of psychology, a chief of nursing, a chief of social work, social service, a chief of psychiatry, and for the first time, a chief of peer services. The idea is that if we all are working from our highest possible place, we have the standards of care that a psychologist has, we have the standards of care that a nurse has, a social worker has, a psychiatrist has, that if we're all really working at the top of our profession, and we're learning to work together as a team, we can get much more accomplished than if we are disjointed, if we are in our own silos, and we start to want to just control our own little territory as a means of feeling empowered. It doesn't help. As simple as an idea as that is, this represents a major shift of consciousness. It represents a major shift in the culture of how we do things. And some of us have become so overwhelmed by the sheer number of individuals that come through the system. In LA, more than 10 million people are represented and serve the Department of Public Health. And so it's easy for us, divided in 8 service districts, it's easy for us when we see this massive organization to begin to feel that no matter how much you do and no matter how much you try and no matter how much you innovate, it's never going to be enough. And some folks actually have said to me that if we provide better services, then we're going to have more people coming through the system. And then what happens? So this culture shift has got to change when we begin to recognize that we have to be our very best in order to give ourselves of our very best to those that we care about. I always say that I want DMH to be the type of organization where I would be proud to have my sibling come receive services. I would be proud to have anybody in my family come and receive services because we are setting the standard. And so this is a long haul. It may be a rough road ahead for us, but I really do believe that this shift in culture is possible. We have models out there. LA is rich in resources. LA is rich in diversity. LA is rich in opportunities. And I very strongly believe that if we begin to gather our resources and begin to see this as a movement, that we begin to see this as a movement that must include each one of us and must honor our contributions, I believe we can do it. I believe we can do it. But it has to start with us recognizing that recovery is one of those end goals. That every person that comes into this system should not get stuck in the system. That if there is a reason why somebody is receiving medication, it is not to have them become dependent of the medication, but to allow for those symptoms to be relieved long enough for that person to be able to move towards their path of recovery. In order for this to be the case, we have to understand what each one of the disciplines offer, and we have to stay in our lane. We can't be all things to all people, because then we're no longer doing our very best from what we know. And oftentimes, I must say that we have actually tried to pay the least to get the most amount of work. Now, how many of you are familiar with that reality? You have lower wages to have somebody do a higher level of skill set so that we end up saving money. And then the thought is that if we're saving money, we're able to care for more people. But the fact of the matter is that if we start to dilute down what we are able to see is the standard of care because we're trying to save money and get the most bang for the buck with the whatever lower resources and lower skill set and lower abilities that you possibly can get. What ends up happening is that our clients, those that we are serving, are not receiving our very best. They're not receiving what we are capable of, what we should ethically be delivering, what we have promised when we took that license and we took that commitment to defend life. We're not able to hold ourselves to those standards. And then everything starts to shift down. Everything starts to shift down. And we get into a position where we ourselves start to get that sort of learned helplessness reality. I love the story of how this concept of learned helplessness came to be in psychology. And thank you so much. This one right here. Thank you. And I got to share this story because it's illustrative. Back in the mid-60s, when we were still able to experiment with animals in some very cruel ways, back in the early 60s, they took some dogs and put them in a cage and electrocuted the bottom of the cage as a means of watching what the dogs would do in response to the shock. So at first, the dogs get electrocuted and they try to scratch, they try to bite, they try to gnaw their way out of the cage. But pretty soon, as the shock continues, the dogs realize that no amount of barking and no amount of scratching and no amount of doing anything is going to change that reality. And what begins to happen is that the dogs just learn to tolerate the shock. You see their bodies react to the electrical impulse, but their behavior doesn't respond anymore. That's how we came up with the term learned helplessness. We can take the fight spirit out of a dog. We can certainly take the fight spirit of a human being. And so many of us have been in situations where we have incorporated a sense of learned helplessness, where we feel it's just the way it is, and there's nothing else I can do about it. And when we internalize that sense of learned helplessness, it creates the reality that we live in. It creates the very reality that we say we don't want. And so first and foremost, I like when one of the panelists said, how many of us actually do have insight into our own issues? We ask for our clients to have insight and to have awareness. But how many of us actually can take that hard look at ourselves and recognize that we too must be able to analyze ourselves? When we're young and we go to school, we learn intelligence, those things that are measured by intelligence. And somehow, somewhere, some smart psychologists got together and decided what we were going to define as intelligence. We decided that intelligence included, several main principles and areas of learning that included writing, that included arithmetic, included similarities, comparisons, the ability to demonstrate abstract reasoning. We put all these concepts together and then came up with some questions to evaluate how smart somebody is based on their ability to respond to questions within these categories. And then we call it an IQ test. But the reality of it is that education is also a political and cultural reality. Interestingly enough, those individuals that are part of a majority culture tend to do much better in IQ tests and other measures than those individuals of a minority background. Shock. Another shocking fact is that not all of us learn information the same way. Children of color and individuals that come from different cultures learn differently. They process information differently. A lot of children of color are more hands-on learners. They must learn by watching a model and being involved, having their little hands involved in the work. Some people are more passive learners. You can listen to somebody and you can kind of pick it up by just listening. So we must make sure that the learning that is being provided is not only culturally sensitive. It's not just enough to recognize you're different than I am and we're all different than each other and so we respect. We have to go beyond the sensitivity to the competence. To provide education and to provide health services in a way that the person that we're serving can actually take in the help that's being provided. And that's huge for us because we see the provision of health and help from our own dominant paradigm. I'm the teacher, I'm the authority, and you're here to receive the pearls of wisdom that I will bestow upon you. And it's a very passive process. We sit in a doctor's office and we wait for hours and hours and hours just to be seen. And then we leave after 15 minutes disappointed that we were never seen. We were physically present in front of a doctor, but we were never seen. We were there receiving medication, but we were never seen. If we can't be seen, we can't be helped. If we can't relate to the person that says they have the education and the degree and the ability to really help us along this path, we can't be helped. We have to create a relationship, not just with each other, we have to create a relationship to the service and to the provider of service that we are receiving help from. And we have the right to say, if this provider is no match for me, I have a right to find somebody who is. And that's what we all have to demand. That's what we all have to demand. So I wanted to share these statistics with you because I think it's important to recognize the burden of responsibility that is shared by you all. The parents, the siblings, the family members in our system really are the bulk of the service delivery. So approximately 43.5 million caregivers have provided help to those they care about in the last 12 months. About 34.2 million Americans have provided or paid to care for a loved one in the last 12 months. The majority of caregivers, 82%, care for one or another individual. So you are a huge portion of the health delivery system. And there are so many caregivers and so many parents that never reach out into a public health system because of fear, because of the bad stigma that has been attached to public health care, because we are ashamed and don't want anybody else to know, and so we carry the burden. But we have to start by really acknowledging that we must support you. We must recognize the value that you provide. We must recognize the amount of money and effort that the department saves because you're taking such a huge part of the responsibility. And so I feel very strongly that we need you and that we need to make sure that you're well cared for, that you have the resources and you have the support that you need in order for you to continue to provide the healing love and connection that you so generously provide to those you care about and to those that you help along this path of recovery. I've talked to so many parents that say, you know, I just want people to recognize that, you know, sometimes this is difficult. That being able to be present for your loved one is difficult. It's difficult on you. And so, you know, my idea of making sure that parents and caregivers are well suited and well supported is also, you know, a little bit of a selfish reason. If we don't have you being well and doing well, we're losing a huge part of our support system. We're losing a huge part of what it is that is the asset that the department has to be able to bring folks back into the community. We can't just lose our loved ones to the jails and to the hospitals and to the institutions. We have to think about how we get them back out into the community. And the bridge to that is you all. So the role of a parent and caregiver in a treatment and recovery process is we must recognize the systemic impact of mental illness, not just on the individual, but on all of us. Mental illness is a systemic illness. It affects everybody in the family in different ways. And so if we are to heal, we can't just focus on healing one person. We have to focus on healing an entire system. And we have to be open to participate in that healing process. Treatment and recovery for identified patient, but also for the entire family, must be a reality that we all strive and embrace. We must support resources and venues for parents and caregivers because we recognize that by providing service and support to parents and caregivers, we are investing in the most effective form of prevention, right? We don't want more serious problems in the future. Let's support families and caregivers to make sure that they have what they need so that we don't end up with more serious issues in the future. The ability to work with families and parents and caregivers increases engagement and treatment adherence of the patients or clients that we are helping. If they see families involved, they're more likely to participate in treatment and be a part of that. But it also, family involvement assures us that our loved one is going to stay on involved in the treatment process. Those parents that are engaged in their loved one's recovery, we recognize that those loved ones that are receiving help have a much higher likelihood of full recovery. So I want you to think of ways in which you take care of yourself and to identify a routine on a regular basis that you are engaged in to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Whether that's meditation or going to church or working out or doing something that is just for you. It gives you the opportunity to unplug from family, unplug from responsibilities, unplug from work, and to just spend time for yourselves, allowing your battery to be recharged. It is really critical. That's where the word religion comes from. Religio. It means to do something on a regular basis that is going to feed your mind, body, and soul. You have a regular practice, whether it's a ritual or whether it's something that you're doing on a regular basis to take care of yourself. So it's very important that you identify something in your life that serves as that battery recharger for you. So the use of a multidisciplinary, and this is now research, so I presented a version of this at Harvard UCLA to doctor residents and interns. And sometimes, we got to have the data, right? We have to have the research in order to believe something. So here's the research. The use of multidisciplinary teams limits adverse events, improves outcomes in treatment, and adds to the patient and employee satisfaction. So I want you all to think about the critical functions in a treatment plan. And I'm not expecting all of you guys to be scientists or to be treatment providers, but I want you to have a sense of some of the critical parts that must go into a treatment plan. We have to have an accurate diagnosis. We have to make sure that the person that is providing that diagnosis is there to help and not hinder. That person that's providing the diagnosis has enough cultural awareness and has enough understanding of the individual sitting in front of them to be able to accurately diagnose what this person needs. That's huge. To have the credentials, to have the education, to provide an accurate diagnosis. I have to tell you, this is a personal sting for me because I have to share this with you. When I first came to this country, I was 9 years old. I'm a Mexican immigrant. And I moved to a suburb in Chicago. And at 9 years old, I didn't speak a word of English. I could probably count to 7 because of 7-Up, the drink, you know. And I used to be able to say, hello, because we had so many tourists that went to Guadalajara, right? So I could say, hello, how are you? I could count up to 7, but that was about it. So when I went to grade school, I was labeled mildly mentally retarded because I couldn't speak. And so the teacher would literally put me in the back of the room with headphones on and watching the film strips. You all remember the film strips, right? You had the little bleep in the tape, and then you kind of switch the picture. So I spent a lot of time in the back of the class, all the kids just knowing that I was different, with huge headphones on, and checked out. I knew back then that if I didn't get rid of that diagnosis then and there and work as hard as I could to get rid of it, it would be something that would follow me the rest of my life. And being the oldest of 6, I represent my family. I'm not about to be the one that is going to let everybody else down, right? So that's where I really got heavily involved in trying to lose my accent. I would record the Brady Bunch on a tape recorder and play it over and over and over to try to listen to the voices so I could lose my accent. But we shouldn't push our children to assimilate and become just like everybody else so that they don't stand out. We have to celebrate their differences and celebrate what makes children unique. So the critical functions, I mentioned diagnosis. We have to have a good treatment plan. We have to know that yes, you're having a tough time. And yes, there are effective treatment plans for even schizophrenia. I personally have worked with a lot of schizophrenic patients who have gotten better. I work with Caregiver Myers, who's our chief, our discipline chief for peer services. And you all got to know her story. You all got to sit down and talk to her and get to know her, because her story is a story of resilience and overcoming. She was diagnosed schizophrenic, and now she's our chief of peer services. So, but we all have to believe that recovery is possible. And that treatment plan has got to demonstrate the path to move from this crisis to recovery. And that treatment plan has got to hold all those providers accountable for delivering what must be delivered in order for that person to get back to their community, get back to their life. You know, one of the things that I do, my first love is not psychology. My first love is curanderismo. And for those of you that know what curanderismo is, This is the native Mexican tradition of healing. And so when the colonizers arrived in Mexico, the first sort of people that got eliminated were the community elders. There were also the medicine men. And in order for the tradition of curanderismo, of folk healing to survive, the healers had to hide in the guise of the Catholic Church. So we created the ability to continue to practice curanderismo by praying to the saints, by practicing herbal medicine in ways that was hidden, because if you were found out, you would be killed. It's interesting enough that the same thing that happened to healers in Mexico, happened to healers in Africa, happened to healers in native cultures all over the world. And so what begins to happen when we as a culture, when we as a people are removed from our own healing traditions, is we begin to be interpreted through the lens of another. And we become diagnosed through the lens of another. So for me, connecting to spirituality and connecting to culture and connecting to those things that really are within our DNA, because our minds and bodies recall, even if you can't remember your ancestral traditions, even if you can't remember where your people come from or what healing traditions they had, those memories are collectively centered in your body, in your DNA. And I'm not just making this stuff up. This stuff has been talked about by Carl Jung. More recently, in genetic studies, we do see that people that are prone to trauma and those that are prone to mental illness have had generations of experiences, ancestors, that those experiences, those memories are collectively engaged in our own consciousness. Right? We are living the impact, the collective impact of slavery, of colonization, of oppression, of all of these forces that, whether we're conscious of or not, we all participate somehow in this reality. We all participate in it. It doesn't matter if you feel that you are entitled. It doesn't matter if you feel that you are oppressed. We're connected in such a significant way that whatever happens to me happens to you. And that's something that we don't like to accept. That when we see somebody homeless on the street, it's like, oh, thank God that's not me. And we look to see like how this person is different than we are, because we would never be able to be that. And yet I was struck by the honesty of one of our panelists up here who said, I'm just okay because I'm concerned about my mom and my brother being homeless. With the rents that we pay in LA, we're all not that far away from homelessness. And so when you think about a system that's saying, okay, well, let's address the issue of homelessness. The issue of homelessness is all our issue. Because, shoot, if you lose your job or if something, God forbid, something happens to you, that could be you. How many of us can afford $3,000 a month for rent in LA? Seriously. So we have to be creative about how it is that we pair up and how it is that we live with each other and how it is that we share the burden of debt. Because that's part of mental health too. If we are not able to take care of our basic needs, just one night of sleep, one night of no sleep can begin to create psychosis. Just one night. 2 nights, and all of us are going to start hearing voices and seeing things that are not there for other people. So the concept of mental illness is not something that is like out there, that happens to other people. Our bodies have the capacity, our minds have the capacity to tap into deep depression, to tap into irrational thought processes, to begin to imagine dark things because of where we're at mentally. Yet if we are fed, if we are clothed, if we are loved, we become stronger It's not that the vulnerability disappears. It's that we become more capable of dealing with the vulnerability. And how many of our young men and women out there on the streets have lost food, shelter, clothing, and just basic human decency from another person that can actually see them as a full living human being? So we need to have treatment that is inpatient, but then the minute that inpatient treatment is over, we have to have a clear plan to move that person from inpatient to outpatient and then to the community. We have to have social services. And social services is connecting somebody to what they need. Do you need a job? Do you need your electric bill paid? Do you need food? Do you need a shower? What is it that you need? Because I can't talk to you about therapy and I can't talk to you about insight if your basic needs are not met, if you're concerned about not having a roof over your head. We need to have peers involved. Somebody that says, I've been through what you've been through. I know that system. And I know where the pitfalls are. And I've journeyed this with others, and I'll journey this with you. I think the 12-step model of recovery for addicts is a good model for us to follow in mental health too. Having a sponsor, having somebody who has been there and knows the road and can advocate for those that don't know the system, because it is a complex machine. So we need people that can push along and say, you know, when you can't advocate for yourself because you don't know what to ask or who to ask, let me be there for you. We need family treatment, support, intervention, so that all families are strengthened and are able to create a sense of inoculation against mental illness. We need community integration. We need to create jobs for people that are coming out of hospitals, out of jails, so that we can reduce the stigma and embrace that individual. So one of the things that I like about curanderismo is that a person who is ill is considered simply out of balance. A person that is ill has lost the balance of mind, body, and spirit. Their energy centers have become misaligned. And the person has lost connection to their role within the family and the community. So what do you think healing is like in curanderismo? In curanderismo, healing, and in other native traditions, healing is about reintegration. Healing is about bringing the person back to the family, back to the community, and reminding them of their importance, why it is that they are a critical part of our overall health and well-being. We need you, in other words. You are a part of our family. You are a part of this community, and you provide something unique. In native medicine and in native traditions, schizophrenia does not exist. It does not exist. Individuals that have the ability to hear voices are gifted. They are sensitive to realities and sensitive to stimuli that you and I, being more dense and more grounded, cannot pick up. And so when somebody is more sensitive to these energies, in our culture, we elevate them to the role of a healer. Somebody who is gay and lesbian is not considered to be a mutant, but is considered to be in touch with the dual spirit, the male-female energies of our Creator, embodied in one person, the two-spirit person. That two-spirit person is a gift to the community. That two-spirit person is a gift to the community because they're able to move beyond the gender stereotypes that we've created as a society that oppress us and keep us in our path. Do we celebrate the difference, Or do we stigmatize the individual for being different? And the more different than an individual is from who we are, the more likely they are to become stigmatized and labeled. And so we have to begin to recognize that every symptom, regardless of what it is, serves a purpose. Every symptom serves a purpose. If a symptom wasn't there, if there was no purpose to a symptom, the symptom would be gone. And so, as scientists, we must fall in love with the mystery of the symptom. Even somebody who is psychotic, even somebody who's hearing voices, there's some truth in there somewhere. There's some connection that this person is trying to reach out and create. And they may not be aware of it. And we may write them off as nonsensical, but we must learn to listen with a different ear. We must learn to listen with a different ear. If people become disconnected from this society and create a reality where we can't reach them, we must understand that this society is not always a pleasant society to be a part of. It's a harsh, critical, judgmental, rigid standards for us to gain acceptance and approval. And so sometimes just suspending our own logic and being able to enter into the realm of somebody who's processing information and data different than you, just allow yourself to be in that space and to feel with compassion, right? That's what compassion means, compasión, with passion, with understanding. That's where that word comes from. We must have enough compassion and empathy to be able to put ourselves in the other shoes and recognize that that is the bridge. You know, that is the bridge to therapy. That's why therapy works. Is we say that somebody that I develop a close relationship with can be my guide, can be my compass, and can get me back to the point when I'm losing it, can get me back to my point of being anchored in this safe environment and safe relationship. That's all it is. So, for those that are into research, the benefits of a multidisciplinary approach, in case I haven't convinced you, is we have improved consumer health outcomes and functioning, enhanced quality of life, reduced cost of care. This alone should be enough reason for us to really demand a multidisciplinary approach, right? Do it right the first time, you don't have to do it again. But so much of the cost of our current system is drained by a very few amount of individuals that we just have not reached, that we've just failed to reach. They are the chronically mentally ill. They are the chronically homeless. They're the ones that everybody's forgotten about, that end up getting picked up by the police in the back of a car, somebody mentioned, sent to the ER room, put on a hold, released from that hold back into the street, being picked up again by another cop somewhere, brought back to the emergency room, stabilized again, and being sent back out into the street, and so on and so on and so on. Get out your calculators and start to see how much that actually is costing us. And if they don't end up on the street, they'll end up in jail. And the jails have become a prolific provider of mental health services. But that's not okay. That can't be okay. So we have to recognize that we got to do something different. We can't punish the person that we can't reach by perpetually keeping them in this loop of learned helplessness. Every single time, and I've worked in an inpatient setting, and let me tell you, every single time a patient comes back into that unit, there is a part of their soul that dies. Every single time somebody comes back to the same place, the sense of internalized failure is so palpable that you know this person is starting to slide down, and we can't allow for our youth to be lost like this. We can't allow for our men and women to be lost like this. We can do better, we must do better. So, if we all know that a multidisciplinary approach saves money and it creates all these good side effects, creates all these good things, how come we're not doing it? So, the research says that the reason why, and let me tell you, even finding the research on the evidence based on a multidisciplinary team was a little bit of a challenge, I must admit. So, the reason why we've said that we can't do this is because the one that you hear most is there are too few mental health professionals. We are in a culture where we don't encourage people to enter the mental health field as professionals. The salaries, the amount of schooling, the lack of respect for the profession itself, the fact that we have a lot of providers that are retiring or getting ready to retire. So we need more individuals to enter the field of mental health and aspire to the highest degree of that profession. We say that we have lack of resources. We say that there's just not enough money to take care of all these folks. We say that there's professional rivalry among the various disciplines. And because of that rivalry, there's lack of trust. This is research, but I can also tell you that we live this reality out there. We still believe in a medical model that cannot be questioned and cannot be supported with other disciplines for fear that we might actually pull down on the importance of that pharmaceutical medical model. There's enough work for all of us. There's enough work for all of us. And we can't just continue to feed medicine to people and have them be dependent on something that is actually toxic to their well-being and toxic to their recovery process. And I love my psychiatrists. I love the peers that I work. I love the people that I work with. But that's not the answer. That's not the only answer. It cannot be the only answer. It has to be a part of a larger vision, and it has to be a part of a larger plan. So, lack of knowledge about what other mental health workers do and what unique skills they have to offer. I wish I had a dime for every time somebody has come up to me and has asked me, well, what's the difference between a social worker and a psychologist? Don't you all do the same thing? No, we don't do the same thing. And yes, we need many social workers and we need many psychologists, but we have a different function. We need social service individuals to connect people to social services. And yes, social services can provide treatment. Yes, social service workers can provide therapy. But there must also be a value for why you would get a damn doctorate in the field, right? We must also encourage those to have higher education and to do that higher level of treatment that's required to understand serious mental illness, to diagnose accurately, to provide a good treatment plan. We must work together. There's enough work for all of us to be able to work as a team and recognize that each one of us, each discipline, has something necessary, something very unique to provide. But we need to work as a team. So just think if everybody on a football team wanted to be a quarterback. Well, it's the position with the most prestige, right? Why don't we all just play quarterback? The reason why a team works is because there are different functions of the players in a team. And when a team comes together and works together, that that harmony creates that symphony, creates that masterpiece that we all come to appreciate. But it's because of the harmony, it's because of the synchronicity that's created. So we also say that there are the cultural factors. And to me, the cultural factors are huge. It's it's not just the sensitivity. We talk a lot about cultural sensitivity. But it's also competence. We have to have and be able to give each other permission to have the hard conversations about race, about oppression, about stigma, about some of those realities that sometimes is just not attractive for us to talk to each other about. We have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to understand how it is that these forces are operating in our country right now, and how it is that they are operating in our daily lives. When we turn on the news and we see children being separated from families because they're trying to search for a better life and being institutionalized, divided, and broken up from their families, we have to care about that. When we see people out in the streets, we have to care about that. When we see how many young men of color and how many women of color are ending up in our jails or ending up in rehab centers if they're lucky to receive that care, we have to be concerned about that, because it's a slippery slope, and we are connected to that reality. But if we're not analyzing all of these forces and how they operate and how they mitigate mental illness and mental well-being, then we become part of the problem. Our silence is a form of collusion. So there is a process that encourages successful team function, and I'm going to just briefly talk about some of these factors that encourage good team function. We establish mutual trust among team members. We have a commitment of open communication. Whatever it is that we say we're going to do in this private room, we go outside. I'm telling you, I've been in situations where we talk in private in this little room, and what gets done and said out there is completely different than what we decided on. And so that open communication, that trust is important. You tell me you're going to do something, I expect for you to do it. Maintaining equality among the team members, and equality is not the same, but if I come to a table with psychiatrists, with social workers, with nurses, with other professionals, I have to feel the respect in order for me to give it back. I have to feel that you respect me and you respect what I have to offer if you want that respect back. Respect is a two-way street. And sometimes we operate in a type of culture where we don't believe in the law of mutual respect. We've been trained that those that have higher education and that have more resources, are more privileged, and have sort of different background or whatever, have a higher value than we do. And unfortunately, sometimes we internalize those messages, and we don't necessarily recognize what we're internalizing, but we do. And so we can't be less than. We have to be equal. And again, having an opportunity to be recognized as equal members does not make us all the same. It is not a melting pot, as we have been taught. It is, I think, the metaphor that's been used is that we're more like a tossed salad than a melting pot. But the fact of the matter is that it's the diversity of the different ingredients that makes that dish so good, right? We can't all just be the same ingredient. We can't all just be the same thing, right? We have to celebrate that diversity. We have to celebrate that uniqueness, whether it's in children, whether it's in professionals, whether it's in ourselves. It's really critical. And we have to be open to provide and receive feedback. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I don't know if it was a form of a defense or what, but I didn't want anybody telling me that I was wrong. It was like, no. And yet, as we get older, we recognize, we have to be open to hear feedback. Even if that feedback is critical. If it's done with the intent to help and done with the intent to inform, we have to be open enough to receive that feedback. And that's important for providers. If we recognize that medication is not working for that patient, and we see that it's not because we're working with that individual, we have to have enough permission within the team to be able to try something different and to hear each other's input. So it's important for us to also understand what makes a healthy team. So I'm just going to go over this real quick. We must have clear and defined goals, both as an organization, whatever the organization is, and also as a team. How is it that we're going to carry the mission and vision of Nami forward as a team? How is it that we're going to carry the vision and mission of DMH as a team? What is our role within that? We must have discussion and agreement about that if we are to be successful. We must recognize that systems, including a set of procedures for giving activities. We must create the policies and procedures. We must create the roadmap for recovery. I'll give you an example. Thank you. Got 5 minutes. So we have a network of providers, psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, social workers, that are paid to contract with the Department of Mental Health. If there are issues in compliance, if there are issues with people not, being able to deliver as they say they do, then the first thing becomes is like, well, maybe we don't need this anymore. When in actuality, we need to resolve the problems that we have in order to increase our capacity out there. We need as many hands as possible on this issue. And so if there's an issue with compliance or not getting something right, let's do the training that's needed to make sure that everybody is able to get the help they need to move the agenda forward, right? We all need each other. Division of labor based on specifically upon each discipline's role is really critical. A nurse is not the same as a doctor. A doctor is not the same as a psychologist. A psychologist is not the same as a social worker. A social worker is not the same as a peer advocate. We must have clearly delineated roles in order to move the episode of treatment along. We must have training in each of the disciplines so that some psychologists in the system went to school 10, 20 years ago. You still have to be a psychologist that understands all the tools and all the measures that are used today. And so, in order for us to stay at the very top of our discipline, of our profession, we must have training on a regular basis that forces us to know all the technology, all the recent technologies, so that we can provide the very best care possible to those we serve. We must have open communication, which we've already talked about. And we must reach out to our community, to our families, to our peers. You are part of this shift. You're a necessary component of this paradigm shift. You're a part of the solution. You're a part of this movement. Embrace that with pride and keep us accountable. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your work, for your healing love, for your compassion. Thank you.